Anyway, good evening. As I said, I'm Paul from Make Votes Matter. Can you all see me all right?
Yeah.
Or hear me? Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Make Votes Matter is a single issue campaign for proportional representation in all UK elections. And we encourage all parties, candidates and MPs to support proportional representation. I'm going to shorten that to PR as we carry on with the talk, by the way. We do not endorse any party or candidates, and we take no position on any other political issues. I'd like to thank you for the invitation to speak to you tonight. I'm going to speak for around about 12, 13 minutes about the problems with our current first past the post system, and to tell you about the benefits of a fairer system of democracy, PR. Rebecca's going to chair a question and answer session at the end of my talk. I hope that's still the case, Rebecca. I believe that society will only be run in the interests of all the people when the people have access to a fair political system. There's obviously a technical aspect to all voting systems, but for me, the fundamental key to democracy is its fairness. A system where seats match votes and our elected bodies are truly representative of the views of the people. But under first past the post, seats do not match votes. Each constituency, of course, returns the candidate with the largest number of votes to represent it. It's a winner takes all. Votes cast for the other candidates are not taken into account in the Parliament. The huge number of votes for the losing candidates have no impact on the election result. Neither does the votes for the winner above the number needed to win the seat. A seat with a 20,000 majority has the same impact as a seat won by a single vote. All votes should have equal value and all votes should matter. Taken together, excess votes for winning candidates and votes for losing candidates are wasted votes. In 2019, 71.2% of all votes cast were wasted, and there were similar percentages in 17 and 15. With so many wasted votes under first past the post, many are now voting tactically. So instead of voting for who you really want to represent you, who you believe in, you're voting for someone you don't like to stop someone else that you dislike even more. At national level, first past the post causes minority rule. Since 1935, we have mainly had single party majority governments, but not a single one had the support of the majority of voters. The current government have a majority of seats with just 43% of votes. They actually gained 48 seats last December, despite only getting an increase of just over 1% of their vote share. Parliament does not reflect the way we vote. In 2019, the Green Party, Lib Dems and the Brexit Party got 16% of the votes. That's actually 5.2 million votes, but they received between them only 2% of the seats. There's a table which shows how many votes each party requires to get an MP. And I'm just going to read out the figures to you here. The SNP got an MP for every 26,000 votes. The Green Party won for 800,000 votes. Brexit, 600,000 votes in total, but no MP. The Lib Dems got an MP for every 300,000 votes. The Tories, 34,000 votes, and Labour, nearly 50,000. Scandalous. It should take roughly the same number of votes to elect each MP, regardless of which party they belong to. It isn't just who you vote for which decides the worth of your vote, but also where you vote. In a safe seat where the same party wins every election, your vote is insignificant. It's of little value. Elections under first past the post are usually decided by just a few thousand swing voters in a small number of marginal constituencies. As a result, parties focus their efforts, resources, and even policies on the small number of voters. Under proportional representation, parties would have to work hard in every constituency to do well in general elections. I've got many other criticisms of first past the post, and there are many studies that also show that countries that use that winner takes all system have less diverse legislators, higher income inequality, and lower participation, lower turnout rates. However, I'd rather now look positively at improving our democracy by the use of proportional representation. Excuse me, I'm just wet by whistle. So what is PR and how can we achieve it? Essentially, PR is any voting system in which the share of seats a party wins matches the share of votes it receives. It means majority rule, not minority. Any government must have a majority of votes behind it. So in order to govern, a party needs to persuade most of us to vote for it, or then to work collaboratively with other parties. It means that political support is reflected in Parliament. If you get 15% of the vote share, then you should be entitled to approximately 15% of the seats. In other words, each vote has equal value and each vote matters. PR means that voters are represented. Almost everyone will have at least one local accountable MP who they voted for and who generally shares their views, beliefs, and values. Someone they can approach with their concerns and know at least that they will be listened to. PR means that very few votes are wasted. Most votes will go towards electing an MP, and voters then could be confident that their votes would make a difference, therefore gives everybody an incentive to vote. And we know that countries that operate with PR tend to have higher turnout rates. PR also means an end to tactical voting. Everyone will be able to vote for who they support without fear of wasting their vote or letting the other side in. PR also links power to public support. Increases in support mean more seats, and vice versa. Reduced support will cause a loss of seats. It does result in a more diverse legislature. The devolved parliaments and assemblies within the UK have a higher proportion of women representatives than their nation MPs returned to Westminster. Countries with PR also tend to have a more average younger age of representatives and many much more BAME reps as a percentage. By the way, all the things I'm talking about with PR also applies to local authority elections as well, or regional assemblies for that matter, should they ever come into being. The time is now to work for PR. Whether we win PR after the next general election will not depend on what happens in the few weeks leading up to polling day. It depends on what happens now and in the coming months and years. It depends on whether we as a movement have put in place the conditions for electoral reform before that election comes. We need to bring together an unprecedented alliance of political parties, organisations and individuals. Now this includes, and I've been hopeful here, the Labour Party, backed by a powerful grassroots movement to campaign together in a coherent, growing and sustainable drive to make PR a reality in the next Parliament. Now that's a big task, and we break this work down to 4 key areas. The Make Votes Matter Alliance. This was formed in 2016 and brings together all the parties, organisations and public figures who want PR. It meets quarterly with two aims. One, to coordinate cross-party actions, including lobbies of Parliament, national action days, other events and media interventions. And secondly, to build consensus on the route to achieving PR. Secondly, last year in 2019, we launched the Good Systems Agreement. This is a historic cross-party agreement on the kind of voting system we need and how to get it. Signed by all the opposition parties, not Labour, I stress, but by many individual Labour and other MPs. Third point is enlarging the alliance. We need to bring more organisations and public figures into the alliance. Other organisations have values that align with the outcomes PR delivers on social, peaceful, environmental and economic grounds. And they tend to have broad grassroots supporter bases who we're working to connect with. If you're a member of an organisation that you think should be in the alliance and currently isn't, then please contact us at Make Votes Matter. We're working with MPs and peers to raise more questions, debates and other actions inside Parliament. We will further develop consensus on the Good Systems Agreement and the use of a citizens' assembly to choose a new voting system. And we're exploring how we can carry out such a process from opposition. And our fourth point is concerning the Labour Party. We are unlikely to win PR without the backing of one of the two largest parties. And as the Tories gain most from first past the post, then we do need to convince the Labour Party to back PR. Make Votes Matter has worked closely with the Labour campaign for electoral reform, visiting hundreds of branches and attending scores of conferences. The good news is that polls now show that 76% of Labour Party members support PR. Resolutions in support of PR have been passed in 85 constituency parties in the last 2 years alone, and more are scheduled to do so soon. The time is now right to mobilise this support and to get a motion on proportional representation debated on the floor of the Labour Party conference in 2021. Obviously, the trade unions are key in this, as they comprise many of the delegates at conference, and motions are currently being placed this year on their conference agendas too. Our whole movement depends on our volunteer activists. Electoral reform is not going to be handed down freely by those in power. It has to be demanded by an organised grassroots movement that will not take no for an answer. My opening remark was that society will only be run in the interests of all if we all have access to a fair political system. 200 years on from Peterloo, we should remember those who fought for democracy. We need a democracy fit for our times. Please support our call for PR. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. That was really informative. Things that I definitely knew, and then also some things that I didn't know. So great to hear about what Make Votes Matter is doing at the moment, and also to have it really clearly outlined what you think the sort of steps might be to sort of pushing this forwards over the next few years. That's fantastic. I'm going to open us up to questions. I know there's been a couple of questions in the chat, but we've got plenty of time together. So if people want to raise hands, either physically or using the Zoom raise hand function, I'll start taking us around and people can ask their questions. There was one from you, Roy. Do you want to ask it yourself, or would you like me to read it out?
No, I'll ask it myself. I mean, I think Paul partly answered it, but one of the criticisms that's made about PR is that you lose that what some people think of unique, a notion that you've got one MP representing you and that there's no one else and that they're the one who's going to take your case. I mean, I know it's a nonsense, but that's the sort of argument people use against PR. And I wondered how you'd counter that, or what sort of PR system you could create that would counteract that risk.
Right, fine. It is a myth, seriously, because we all have one constituency MP, and they certainly don't represent everybody in the constituency that they represent. So that in itself is a nonsense. If you have views that are completely antagonistic towards the MP who happens to represent you, how little trust are you going to have in their ability, one, to listen to you neutrally, and then to expend their energies in trying to put forward your idea and your values? It's going to be extremely difficult. However, I must be clear on this as well. There's not a single system of proportional representation. There are quite a number of systems. And Make Votes Matter is not saying this is the system we're going to follow. But bear in mind, we already have very successful implementations of multi-member constituencies in our devolved assemblies and parliaments, and they work pretty well. And one of the great benefits is that, I mean, if I was still in Dundee, which is where I'm originally from, I know that I would be guaranteed to have an MP, not just from the constituency, the local constituency, but also from the regional list of Dundee and Tayside, that would allow me to have somebody that I knew I shared values with, and I could communicate with them quite easily and freely and not have any qualms about it. I do appreciate that there is a situation where people say it loses the link. To me, it doesn't. You've got to make sure the MPs all work, or the MSPs as it would be in Dundee. One other aspect, which is the only negative I'll really personally accept on this basis, is that, and it's not something we're talking about per se, but democracy has many other aspects that need renewing and re-energizing, and we're not concentrating on them tonight, but we're only talking about PR. But things like recall of MPs. How do you recall somebody from a regional list? Everybody knows that you can recall a constituency MP by getting a certain percentage of votes of the constituents of that particular constituency under certain very limited conditions. But if you had a regional set of representatives, that would be even more difficult, I think, to invoke. Is that okay?
Thank you, Paul. Roy, does that answer your question? Did you have any follow-ups?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, what I am aware of is that all sorts of very reasonable people in the campaign for the the transferable vote, I heard very reasonable people talking rubbish because they'd latched on to an argument that I didn't think was true, but somehow and I think if we're going to argue for this, we've got to have a very, very solid arguments, and I'm not sure if, I don't know really. I mean, people do feel sometimes, even though, I mean, I can think of a situation now where there's a Conservative MP pushing very hard for a railway line in the Don Valley, and she's genuinely pushing for it. And I think people sometimes, even though they're completely opposed to your general political philosophy, you have one person who maybe latches onto something, and it might not be as powerful under PR. I don't know. But so I do think it's something we need to look at and to have arguments for. Because I mean, otherwise, I'm completely in agreement with everything that Paul said about the unrepresented nature of the system we've got at the moment.
No, it's all right. I've got family in Scotland, and they have been dealing with this for quite a number of years now, and they all say that it works. So I'm more prepared to accept, and by the way, they don't all share voting preferences with me, but they all agree that it's a far more democratic way of doing things.
Brilliant, thank you. Declan, did you have a hand up there? Did you want to come in on that point?
Yeah, I was going to ask another question, but it's not unrelated, really. I mean, I've lived in Northern Ireland and in Scotland. Actually, the first time I ever voted was in Scotland, and it was for the first Scottish Parliament. So it was under a PR system. So for the first kind of few elections of my life, it was PR, and I wasn't really used to when Westminster rolled round and you had no choice. You were down to kind of, you get to pick one candidate. Which made it extremely difficult because I was used to being able to say, okay, well, these guys are first and these guys are second. But I was going to ask Paul about, because I was talking to a friend about this today, about how we get PR, because really it's going to be through convincing the Labour Party. And we know their members want it, 70% of their members want it. And it was in Labour's manifesto back in the day. They commissioned the Jenkins report to recommend, which recommended it. So it doesn't seem, within the Labour Party, it's this bizarre organisation where it doesn't matter what the members want, it doesn't matter what gets voted for at their conference, it doesn't matter what was in their manifesto, it only seems to matter what the leader wants. And we know that Jeremy Corbyn didn't really want PR. John McDonnell might have done, but Jeremy Corbyn didn't because of that constituency link that Roy mentioned. I have no idea what Keir Starmer stands for, anything really, and he's certainly not keen to come out in favour of PR, and neither is my local MP Louise Haigh. But how do we move an organisation like Labour, which is so bafflingly undemocratic? And also, I was just wondering what role Make Votes Matter have with Labour for PR.
Right. Okay. Very fair point. I'm sure, and I'm glad you said it at the beginning, we're not going to get it without the Labour Party being on board, right? Now, that's not an excuse. This is just reality, and I think that we can't do anything else but be real about the challenges that face us. Labour MPs, there are, at the last count, about a third of Labour MPs do have a favour, not all out, but a favour for changing from first past the post, and PR in general gets their okay. My own MP is Barry Shearman, who's been an MP in Huddersfield for 40 years. He backs PR. It's about the only thing that I actually agree with him on. And it's just one of these things. Keir Starmer has indicated that he's in favour. However, in 1995, thereabouts, Tony Blair was very, very keen until we achieved a landslide in May 97. And that's one of the difficulties with the large parties, is where they do get a big vote and they form a majority government, we're actually asking them to say, no, you hold on to this and you do it purely on the basis of implementing PR and getting that through. Then we have another election under PR. It's going to be extremely difficult, but we are approaching not critical mass, because we're not there yet. But this is why I'm glad, in a sense, the next election is not until 2024, because we have a chance to build. And there's a Labour campaign for electoral reform. Make Votes Matter has been working closely with them. I'm also an accredited speaker for them, because although I can go out to many other organisations and other political parties like tonight, Labour Party branches and constituencies tend only to want to hear from Labour Party activists. So it's one of the reasons why LCER is there. For that matter, there's also campaigning groups for electoral reform in the other parties as well. Like the Lib Dems have got a separate group because they know they've been a bit lackadaisical about really pushing it in the manifestos at subsequent elections. Similar to Labour Party, it must be said. It's a task and a half. We've got to get the big unions on board because they're the ones that force the agenda. There's little democracy in the Labour Party. We're gradually building it and refreshing it to where it was pre-Blair years, but we're nowhere near there yet. I'm struggling on and I will continue to work and fight for it. But there's no magic potion. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Paul. I'm just going to take us back to a couple of questions that have popped up in the chat. So Douglas, I don't know if it was a rhetorical question or not, but would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, I mean, it's a genuine question. I think possibly Paul's answered it. Thanks for that talk, Paul. That's really fascinating, and for everyone else. But yeah, basically, if PR is so good, why has it not happened?
Well, funnily enough, in the early years of the 20th century, there were a lot of changes, lots of reforms to democracy. I mean, one was finally giving women the vote in the UK, etc., and reducing the age qualification. And all across Europe at that time, that's when proportional representation started to become not a trend. I don't like that word, but it was seen as the sensible thing to do. It was pro-democracy. It was only really the UK that said, no, we're not having this. But all throughout, I mean, the Scandinavian countries and to Germany and Austria, Italy, and so on, it was the pre-Second World War, interwar years between World War I and World War II, where most systems of PR came into being. In Britain, the politicians, and in the main, if you're talking about the early years of the 20th century, it was really only two parties, wasn't it? Yeah, there was the Conservatives and Labour. And between the two of them, first past the post tends to fit reasonably well when you've generally only got two choices. But the more diverse views have become, the more people have been prepared to work for what they actually believe in, the number of parties and competing interests at election times has actually grown to the extent that PR is becoming far more necessary. It should have been done by now. I'm in total agreement with you. But I wasn't necessarily a real proponent or an activist on the idea. I favoured it in principle, but I was too involved with too many other things that needed addressing. But now is the time, as far as I'm concerned. It's the only thing that's going to enable this country to generally return progressive governments in the years ahead.
I mean, I totally agree, Paul. I'm just saying, of course, it's, you know, the thing, the lack of PR is what makes you know, democracy so uninspiring to so much of the population now, you know, where they live in safe seats. But it's the other way of saying, you know, the old complaint that it doesn't matter who you vote for because it's always the government that gets in, which I think is the point you made before about, you know, when the Tories have got a big majority, they want to keep first past the post, and that's exactly what Labour did. And really, it's Labour. The Tories would expect to block our way towards progress, but of course, you know, Labour, you know, had 13 years when it could have brought in PR if it was, you know, a principle of the party at that time, and it didn't. So the question is really, you know, I mean, I think that's the answer. The question is really about, you know, what you said about Labour turning around possibly, but it's a very slow moving ship in that way.
Coincidentally, if I can just say another thing on this, Rebecca, please. In 1951, this is after the election after the Attlee government, which brought in so many great things, advances in social welfare. In 1951 general election, the Labour Party received its highest ever share of the votes, 48.8%. Far more, 200,000 more votes than the Tories. And lo and behold, Winston Churchill became the Prime Minister. And that reforming government was defeated. Now, I would have hoped at that time that there would have been a push within the Labour Party as such at that time in the early 50s to say, we can't allow this to happen again. But as it happens, Labour received a similar return in 1974 in one of the two elections in that year, where the Tories had the majority of votes and Labour formed the government.
It's an issue of long history, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's an issue of a long history. And I found what you said about the trade unions really interesting, Paul, because I think, I mean, this is just me sort of speculating here, but I think part of the issue of getting Labour on board with something like proportional representation also involves getting the trade unions on board with changing their own democratic structures, which might not be something that many of the big unions are necessarily fond of. So it's a very interesting piece of the puzzle. If I could ask Colin, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. I'm actually going to steal somebody else's question and combine it, I think, because I'm not enough of a political historian to know whether 1930s Germany had PR form, but I know they had minority governments, and that was actually how Hitler got into power democratically. So I'm sort of half stealing Alan Yearsley's question about whether it allows extremists to get represented, and that's a good or a bad thing, and that's a question. But my question was more modern, that like the last couple of years, Belgium took like 2 years to form a government because the sort of factions that needed to collaborate, not enough of them would. And is that a weakness of the system? And how would you argue against that in terms of the sort of conversations socially, or when actually, actively campaigning? If people come up with those kind of, perhaps they're specious arguments, they're not true, but they say, oh, look at those European countries, they're always messing around and they never have a proper government, and they mention places like Belgium and Italy.
Yeah, Italy's the favourite. That's the one that's always used. I hate to use the term strong and stable government for obvious reasons.
You mean like Mr. Hitler? Yes, nice. Yes.
And the others.
But paradoxically, while arguing that first past the post makes it easier to kick out governments, opponents of PR often claim that first past the post leads to a more stable political system. The reality is that the majority of the most stable democracies around the world use proportional representation. There is actually something called the Fragile States Index, which I'd never heard of until I researched the subject more. And the most stable countries in the world, the top four, Finland, Norway, Switzerland, and Denmark, use some form of PR. So I can't say other than that. I have no idea what the system was in play in the Weimar Republic when Hitler became Chancellor in 1933, was it? Something like that?
Yeah.
I don't know, but I suspect PR would have been in place at that time. But you've also got to bear in mind that whilst the Nazis were a small party to begin with, they quickly achieved critical mass amongst the population of Germany. Now, I'm not excusing it, but the one thing that you will get with proportional representation is a representative democracy. Now, in terms of extremism, as well as instability, if there are extreme views out there held by the citizenry, the electorate, then of course that's going to be reflected. But I'm a great believer in, especially the extreme right aspects, that the best disinfectant is sunshine. And if you do get people returned, as we've had in the Yorkshire area in the past, where we've had BNP councillors elected to our local councils, it's been pretty self-evident pretty quickly about their inability to actually achieve and to represent people properly, with the ultimate result that they were defeated in time. But yes, it's dangerous. But most PR systems in the modern world operate what we call a threshold vote. So it's not that if you get, say, 2% voting support, you will get, say, 2% extreme right councillors. Normally the threshold is set at somewhere between 3 and 5%. Now, you could argue that that is a counter-argument to proportional representation, but it's also a fair one in the sense of making things democratic. I mean, for example, to stand as a parliamentary candidate for Westminster, you only need 10 signatures of the electorate, but you need a £500 deposit. I would far rather see that there be no charge of deposit for local candidates, but you would have to get a higher, vastly higher number of signatures to indicate that you've got a basis of support in there. Now, that's just my view. That's not Make Votes Matter or the Labour Party or whoever. That's just my perception of the thing. Italy is an extreme example, and it's the one most often used. Belgium, less so, but it was correct. There was a 2-year hiatus with the side benefit, of course, for most of the Belgian stand-ups is that we don't really need a government because we seem to be doing reasonably okay without one. Is that okay?
Yes, could I just come back very quickly on the Nordic countries?
Yeah.
I think they're often quoted in a lot of cases. They're small and they're ethnically homogeneous. So I think they're bad analogies or bad parallels for a country like Britain or other central and major larger European countries where we have very large ethnic minorities and potentially various kinds of pressure groups. No disrespect to the need for those sometimes, but various pressure groups from minorities of various sorts in many of those countries. And it's very different in the Nordics. Very, very different. Yeah.
I was going to say that I was just quoting from the Fragile States Index about stability in the most stable governments. I'm not saying that that is essentially a byproduct of PR. It's maybe the way they are. But in all the work I've done, all the literature I've read on this, the actual ethnic background or makeup hasn't impacted at all on the use of first past the post or PR. But I mean, I hear what you're saying. There may well be something out there that I've not seen. And if you find it, please share it with me. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. I know, Claire, you've had a few questions in the chat. Would you like to ask?
Yeah, so basically, so I haven't put the kids to bed. So there might be a few rogue elements coming in. So I think it's good to have very specific requests. And I think you said about the role of citizens' assemblies. And I think that is potentially a way to make it happen, isn't it? Like, I think if you got a group of representatives of the country, most people would be like, yeah, sure, all votes should matter. And then that assembly could go, we want this form of PR, and the government would go, it would kind of force their hand, wouldn't it? And I think like it's been, I'm no expert in anything, but I think that's how they brought through some changes in Northern Ireland, isn't it? That was the abortion law and the gay marriage came through that way. And so I don't know whether how we can be specific in requesting that, like campaigning for that specific issue, because maybe if we're asking for a citizens' assembly for that, it takes the pressure off the individual MPs that they are committing to it. What they're committing to is the fact that people are going to decide the change. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. I think citizens' assemblies are very good things to progress issues like this. They obviously take time to set up, and the participants would be selected in general as citizens' assemblies, like a jury, but obviously on a far larger basis.
Kind of thing, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a win-win in the sense of absolving politicians of trying to work out the detail. But what we would need to do is get a buy-in from the politicians to heed the results of that.
Yeah. So
or refuse at their peril.
Yeah, and ask for that rather than.
Yeah. The main reason that we're doing this work is ostensibly the only thing that's going to introduce PR is from the ground up if there is a demand from the electorate.
Yeah.
In other words, every MP, every councillor gets inundated with demands from their electorate saying, this we see as probably one of the most important issues to face us and will have the biggest impact on our future. Now, if we can get that and build and build and build, and I'm hoping by doing something like this that, you know, you in turn will go out and speak to others as well and try and share that view, even if it's only with your family members, and build this movement towards critical mass that allows us to do that. But there's an awful lot of complexities involved, and I don't underestimate the problems that we face in getting it. But I'm doing my bit, and I will do my damnedest to get this. I've been involved in politics since I was 17 years old. I'm now 65. Picture probably makes me look a bit younger, but it's a live picture. I can't see it's an old. The situation is that I want to see it in my lifetime, and I think we have the possibility.
I just think we live in a kind of attention economy, don't we? Where like people, like there's so many issues like bombarding everyone all the time, and like that's exacerbated by social media and everything else. And I think to get the kind of clarity in everyone's mind that unless you have this, you know, everything else you want to see isn't gonna happen is really challenging. And yeah, anyway, I can't remember what my other thought was. A bit of a, I don't know whether left field right thing. I should make a confession to you, Paul. I've got a bit of a crush on Ed Miliband because I listen to Reasons to Be Cheerful podcast all the time, and I just think he's ace. Like I love that podcast. It genuinely gives me reasons to be cheerful all the time. But they did one about mandatory voting and how, because basically I think people don't feel their votes matter because they don't, and so they don't vote, and so you get really government policy tailed towards the voters who tend to be certain sections of society, aren't they? Essentially my parents, and who always vote. And I think, and it was about, you know, whether, you know, like if you had an Australian system, or even I think we should drop the voting age to 16, but whether it was linked to something like that, and whether even you did compulsory first voting or something like that, so people understood it was like part of my civic duty, and this is how we make sure that we get represented well because everyone does it. So I didn't know whether it needs to be linked into like wider reform rather than just proportional representation.
Well, I agree with you in terms of there are so many other things that need to be addressed to overcome the democratic deficit, which is really self-evident in this country.
Yeah.
However, we have got to look at PR only as a single issue, because to tag on the other aspects like mandatory voting, compulsory voting, I'm personally in favour of that, but that's not a make votes matter policy viewpoint. I like, by the way, compulsory voting as long as we adopt something like the Green Party has with Ron. Yeah, reopen nominations. Do you still have that?
Yeah.
Either that or, in general terms, none of the above.
Yeah.
However, none of the above might win, and then you have to have another election. But yes, I accept that. Can I just say that I haven't paid attention to much of the chat stuff going through because obviously I'm focusing on what I'm saying, but I saw somebody that just said, yes, well said, Annabel. Absolutely right. But I've no idea what Annabel said. Was it a question that has come to me and I've missed it? That's all.
Well, did you want to give a little summary of what you said, or should I read it out? It's up to you.
Yeah, it wasn't a question. I was just saying it's important to remember PR doesn't mean whoever has the most votes can become a dictator. So part of this campaign needs to be about strengthening democracy and PR as a route to accountability and scrutiny. So it was about, you know, the Nazis didn't just win most of the votes and then they were allowed. They actually intimidated people, bullied, changed laws, implemented basic lack of process so that they could commit abhorrent acts. So I was just trying to make that point.
Absolutely. And part of representative democracy is, of course, accountability. And that's why I did mention the potential negative about how do you recall regional list or party list representatives when they don't have necessarily a direct link to your immediate neighbourhood. Yeah, so I understand that, but nonetheless, the benefits to my mind, outweigh all the rest. But yes, it's a fair point you've made, Annabel.
And my political crush is obviously Caroline Lucas. I feel like there might be a few others in the Zoom.
I think having a meeting just about political crushes might be something that we
Yeah,
I've definitely got more than one.
something that everyone needs.
I'm not qualified to speak on.
Lovely, thank you. Thanks, Annabel, and thank you, Paul. We've just got there were 2 other questions in the chat, so I think we've probably got time for them, and then we might have to wrap up. But John, did you want to ask your question?
If it's the one about the Labour Party and 76% of members, thank you, but I think it's already been answered. I'd totally forgotten about that. The Labour Party doesn't just consist of members, it consists of other organisations, so I won't take up time, thanks.
Yeah, it's not just about getting things through to the conference floor, is it? Which in and of itself is a very complicated process. It's I think we have the luxury in the Green Party of policy making being a lot more straightforward in some ways, and in others maybe not. But Alexa, you had a question as well. Would you like to ask it?
Yeah, just as a Labour member, do you think that now that it seems that Labour can never win an election again with first past the post, as they've lost Scotland, they might have lost areas of the north possibly forever? Do you think that makes it more likely that Labour will get behind proportional representation, even if that means that certain MPs won't have safe seats anymore? I mean, we've seen that some safe seats are no longer safe seats. Like, who could have predicted that Dennis Skinner would have lost his seat, for example?
Yeah, it's a fair point. I would far rather see us, from an ideological perspective, recognising the fairness of introducing PR, but sometimes needs must can be the impetus, the motivation that some, let's call them stick in the muds, not progressives, might just realise that things have got to change because we are getting kicked. Yeah, I still stand by the fact that we've got an awful lot to do within the party itself. I'm talking about the Labour Party now, to overcome the emasculation of our internal democratic mechanisms that took place under Blair. And it was one of the reasons I left, because until the most recent democracy review, and even that's been pretty basic, basically policy making within the party was restricted to the centre. Members had absolutely no say. They've got national policy fora, but you had to be invited to be a member of them. And that's absolutely scandalous. I think I appreciate the point that somebody asked, was it Johnny's name? About 76% membership being in support. I think we've also got to realise that that isn't sufficient in itself. We've got to use their pressure on all the other decision-making aspects as currently stand to resolve the issue and get them on board. Not easy, but I'm not giving up.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Alexi. I think Eamon's just got a question for us that would be quite good to wrap up, actually. So, Eamon, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, Paul, can you give us a little bit more information about some of the other groups working in this area? Maybe explain what they do that's maybe slightly different to Make Votes Matter, and maybe how you hopefully are all working together. The obvious ones are Compass and Electoral Reform Society that I'm aware of, and maybe at the end of that you can just tell us again, you know, what's the best way for us to get involved and campaign for PR, you know, as well as obviously joining up to Make Votes Matter being an obvious way to do it, but you know, generally what's the best things you think we should do?
Oh, to be honest, I know you mentioned it in the email, but because of the other things that I've had to do, I haven't had a chance to really research much on Compass. I'm not involved. One of the reasons for that is that I'm involved with so many other activities. And I'm activist for Amnesty International, as well as, until just a few weeks ago, I was the chair of the constituency Labour Party. So I had an awful lot to do. So I don't possess all the answers. There are many, many organisations, and one of the reasons we were asking those who are interested to sign up on the form that we've supplied to you digitally is it gives you access then to all our research, our information, and there are many, many organisations that are working with us, but not necessarily exclusively with us, to try and bring about PR. There are many organisations. I'm hoping that the Good Systems Agreement and the Make Votes Matter Alliance, two of the key stages that we're looking at to try and bring about the preparation to get PR at the next Parliament. I'm hoping that everybody's contributing together. However, there's no guarantee on that. It all requires us to work as in solidarity as much as we can. That's difficult in itself. So I'm sorry, Eamon, I've not been able to do what you asked.
That's all right, Paul. We'll all be doing our own bit of research into Compass and Electoral Reform Society and others. And I've just put up the PR Alliance link on the chat.
It's
just now.
makevotesmatter.org.uk. There's tons of material on there.
Yep.
Lovely. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Eamon. There's just a sort of last point from me, Paul. You've mentioned that, you know, we've been through some of the organisations that we can get involved in, and obviously Make Votes Matters campaign. What do you think we can do as individuals going forward to push for this? Do you think there is value in us as people living in Sheffield, and also, you know, Green Party members or members of other parties, writing to councillors and writing to the MPs to try and push this? What actions can we take as individuals after this meeting, for example?
Perhaps you could issue a statement to the local media and might get something out of that. But it's about, as I said, putting pressure on. I mean, maybe I should have checked this, but I don't know who your MPs are in the Sheffield constituencies. I know you've got Sheffield Hallam. Is it another constituency, or are there 3?
There's more than that.
All right.
6 in total.
6.
Right, okay. And they all cover the town? Or the city?
Yeah, 5.5.
Right, okay. Speak to them. Put pressure on them. Ask them their views. Say that we want this to happen. The more that is fed up the chain, then the more likely it is that they're going to pay heed to it. But I would ask you first and foremost, talk to your friends, work colleagues, families. Just ask them what they think. You might find that there is a feeling out there that our current democracy is not fit for purpose.
Very likely.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul. That's brought us. We've run a few minutes over time, so I'm not gonna keep you any longer. But thank you so much for coming to speak to us. It's been a pleasure and a really good conversation as well. Thank you, everyone, for participating. We've got probably just a few short updates on Green.
Do you want to let Paul? Thank you. Do you want to? You're very welcome to leave us, and if thank you very much.
I will do, actually, and thank you very much once more for inviting me to this. This was actually, I mean, we run an accredited speaker program for outreach purposes, parties and non-parties, because things like church organisations, charities, all these groups, you know, I'll go out and speak to. But this is my very first one as an accredited speaker for Make Votes Matter. So thank you for letting me do it as the first one. So I hope it's gone well. And if there's any feedback you can give me with regards to how I've come across or what I've said, I'm more than happy to receive that, because that will enable me then to improve for all future events. Okay?
Thank you, Paul. We will do that. We will do that. Thank you.
I'm going to leave this now, okay?
Thanks very much.
Cheers.
Evening. Thanks, Paul. That was brilliant.
Paul has a very nice personality, which is half the battle, I think.
Oh yeah, yes, definitely.
So,
Right then, thanks everyone. So that sort of draws the talk to a close. I've only got some very short updates for everyone. How do people feel about, does anyone feel like we need a break, or is it okay for me to just waffle on for maybe 5 additional minutes?
Yeah, that's fine, I think.
Go ahead. University Challenge beckons.
Brilliant. Well, thank you everyone. It's just a couple of things really. So the first of which, this has gone out in the members newsletter, but it's just to let everyone know that we did have some internal elections recently, which has affected the membership of our executive committee. And there's been a few changes. So one of which is that I'm now in post as chair and coordinator. So you'll probably be seeing a lot more of me over the next however long that lasts for. I think it's technically 2 years in the constitution, but I think because I was co-opted into this role, obviously when the elections roll around next year, it would be the right thing for me to actually allow it to open up for re-election. I think that would be the democratic thing to do. We've also got Teresa, who's being co-opted as our treasurer. And I think she's been doing it for a little while anyway, but she's going to continue in that post and is doing a great job of it.
Teresa Ravenshaw, who was co-opted a year ago, I think.
Yeah, so she's going to continue with that co-option because for some reason people just don't want to be treasurer, even though you get to be in charge of all the money, which sounds very exciting. We've also got Dan Hardy, who's joined us as digital and data coordinator. We've got Stuart Henderson, who has changed roles and is now the campaigns coordinator. We've got Callum Sweet, who I think you're with us on the call, Callum, who has joined Johan in being the youth and student officer. And I think that's everyone that's sort of come on board into the new exec. There's some people that have been in place for a while, obviously. Eamon, yourself as our elections coordinator, and Marianne as the governance officer, is that correct? Yeah. Have I forgotten anyone?
Governance and policy.
Governance and policy. Thanks, Declan.
Hopefully not.
So that's the current exec as it stands at the moment. We do have some roles that are still needing to be filled. So more information about that is going to come around over the next few weeks, and obviously welcome expressions of interest once they're advertised, so to speak. And then the other thing to say is that we have newsletter deliveries going on at the moment. I know, for example, Walkley and Broomhill have definitely got theirs out. I think Hillsborough's going out soon or at the moment.
Yeah, it's going out.
And we're expecting Gleadless Valley to be going out shortly too. So if anyone does have any spare time, spare capacity to support newsletter deliveries, please get in touch with ward organisers. We're not doing any door knocking or canvassing at the moment, but getting those newsletters out is a priority and a good use of your time if you fancy a walk before the weather gets too miserable. And the only other thing to say is that the campaigns group is meeting this Wednesday. And that will be from 7 o'clock till 9 o'clock. If you've got any interest, if you're not on the campaigns group list, then get in touch with Stuart Henderson and he can send you the details over. John, sorry, you had a hand up there.
I just wanted to mention something totally different, if I may.
Yeah, cool.
Well, you may all know this, but we now have a vacancy for our candidate in Walkley for the May 2021 council elections. Debbie Moon, we thought was going to be our candidate, but Debbie told me at the weekend just gone that she wanted to withdraw for personal reasons. So given that Walkley is one of our target wards, and in the May 2019 elections, if I've got my years right, our candidate only lost by about 40 votes, it definitely ought to be a winnable ward for us. So I'm very keen that we should have a good candidate in Walkley in May 2021. So if any of you are interested, or you know anyone who might be interested, please promulgate this quickly, because the closing date for nominations is, I think, the 20th of September, which is only 12 days away. And just as a PS, I'm not going to stand because I'm too old.
Oh, you're not too old, John. It's fair enough if you don't want to do it, but you know, age is no barrier to democracy. Thanks, John. That's great. I know that an email has gone out about that, so do check your inboxes or encourage people to check theirs. If you've got any questions about standing, it is quite a tight turnaround and a tight deadline. You can email Eamon. You can email me, and I'm happy to sort of, forward or liaise with Eamon around questions. I know that Martin Phipps has volunteered that if there are any young Greens interested in standing, that he would be very happy to speak to people. And I'm sure that Douglas and the other councillors would be very happy to speak to anyone who's interested. If anyone's sort of thinking, oh, maybe, but I don't know what it involves or how big the time commitment would be. If you've got questions, just get in touch with someone as soon as possible, and we'll link you up with someone that can answer those questions.
Can I just quickly, Rebecca? Yeah, there is a local government association Be a Green Councillor leaflet booklet, quite a lengthy booklet, which I can send to anybody. And also to say you don't actually have to be a member of the party to be selected, but you would have to immediately join the party and go through an interview to go into the selection process. And we do have 2 councillors who are in that position at least, and that's Kaltoum Rivers and Angela Argencio. But in other words, if you know anyone, it is possible to approach people, but that needs to happen very quickly because the nominations deadline is the 20th of September. So it's a 2-week fast track process. We will reopen nominations for another week if we do not get a non-male candidate coming forward.
And thanks for mentioning that, Becca. I was about to say I'd be more than happy to speak to anyone who wants to know more about the experience of being a councillor. Thanks. Without putting them off.
Alan. So I suppose maybe it might be worth me asking around amongst my friends at St Mark's, many of whom live in Walkley. They're still, of course, you don't have to live in the ward.
No, but it helps, Alan, and if they have a sort of community track record in Walkley, that is a good background for a councillor. And many councillors are recruited as people who do community work who aren't necessarily linked to political parties. So you're very welcome to, Alan, but you're going to have to do it very quickly.
Oh yes, sure, right enough. And if anyone does come forward, should I pass their details on to you?
Yeah, do quickly. Contact me separately, Alan. Yeah.
Sure.
Thanks.
Wonderful, thank you. That was it from me, and thank you for that, John, and everyone on that topic. Does anyone else have any final announcements or things you'd like to pass on while we're all here?
And you were saying about newsletter deliveries. I may well be in the Broomhill area this Sunday because I go to St Mark's Church, and this Sunday I'm hoping to attend in person for the first time since the lockdown. So, John, would you be the best person to collect them from, as you live round there?
It's me, really, Alan. Let's separately email me, you, and John, and get you to do something that's needed, because we may not be. I'll be in touch separately.
Okay, I'll drop you a message. Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone, then. Well, I'm going to let you all go and have your tea.
Can I just say, I really like the introduction bit. I like the hi, who you are, where you're from. Do that again next time. I loved it. I don't know. I still don't know who everyone is. It was helpful. Thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
Just to
we
say,
can find
the reason
everyone's
why
political crush. Sorry.
I want a cat. I really want a cat now. I've been watching and been thinking, I like sitting here with like a little villain, little cat on.
I don't know if you do after what I've been experiencing at all.
I do have to say I very much appreciated all the pets that we got to meet this evening. I know that we weren't introduced to the pets, but they were a welcome addition. And thank you everyone for coming. It's great to see a good turnout at these members meetings, particularly when we have an external speaker. And I suppose I'd ask that obviously if you've come along tonight and enjoyed it, that the next time that we advertise one, you maybe poke a friend and say, oh, this is a good way to spend your Monday evening, because not everyone always thinks that it is, but we are going to be making sure that we have some interesting speakers going forwards.
It was a really good selection of speakers. I don't know if anyone saw this Festival of Debate. I'm not sure if it's Festival of Debate or Migration Matters one called Is COVID-19 Racist? Did anyone watch that? That was really, really good. And there were some excellent speakers. One of, I can't remember the names, I'm really sorry. But if you look up if is COVID-19 racist, and I don't know if one of them would be prepared to come and talk about the kind of diversity issues of the city. Because I think in terms of representation, you know, the diversity of Sheffield is not represented on any kind of like boards. And like, I thought it was a really good little intro. I was very like, I kind of thought it was a bit of a problem, but I didn't realise how much of a problem it was. But that was a good thing to watch recently online as well.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you, Claire. And if anyone else has any suggestions for speakers or talks or topics that you'd like us to cover as part of these members meetings, do just drop me an email or get in touch with the exec, email the exec email address. Declan?
Just before we go, does anyone, when do we find out the results of the national leadership election?
The 9th.
The 9th.
It's the 9th.
So it might be useful to get in like on the 9th or 10th and get whoever, like someone from the leadership team, get straight in there and ask them to come in, especially if there's a change.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. That's a good suggestion. Yeah, we'll be keeping an eye on that. So obviously, particularly if there's a change, it would be great for us to reach out and get someone along to potentially introduce themselves.
Yeah.
Callum, was that a hand there? Sorry. You may have just been stretching.
Me?
Yeah.
No. No. I want to say something good now, but I've got nothing to say. So, sorry.
That's fine.
I think you're stroking the cat.
Yeah, sorry. I've just got a kitten, and it's just been a nightmare throughout this whole phone call of just running around and jumping on me and scratching me and sitting on the computer. Yeah, it's been hard work.
Oh, well, thanks for powering through, Callum. It's really appreciated.
So, sorry, what date did you say was the deadline for nominations for the candidate? You say it was
It's the 20th, Alan. And would you mind just staying on at the end, and you and John will have a chat about newsletters?
Okay.
Okay.
Brilliant. Right. Evening, everyone. And I'll
Thank you very much.
see you soon. Take care.
Bye. Take
Okay.
care.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
everyone. Bye.
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 Right.
Eamon, if I could have a chat with you at some point as well, and to do with the Walkley thing.
Okay, you can call me. You can call me in 10 minutes if you want to.
All right. Thanks.
If
Bye.
you want to. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye. Alan.
Yes.
Yeah. The two things. Yeah. The deadline is the 20th.
Yes.
As say, if it's not somebody who's a member of the party, then there's quite a lot of them to think about. And but if you know anyone who's involved in the community, you know, in and around Walkley, you know, then yes, do speak to them, or put them on, or ask them to talk to me or to John.
Sure.
But it needs to happen very quickly.
Sure. Okay.
Okay. And the other thing about newsletters is I'm not around on Sunday. Otherwise, I'd offer to do a round with you. John, have you got anything? I mean, St Mark's it's a fair way from Walkley. I mean, is there anything over that end for Walkley at the moment? Because I can probably give something to Alan to do, but he might be best to actually pick it up from you. I could leave it with you.
Yeah, you could do that. There isn't. I don't think you have a car, do you, Alan?
No, but it's just if there were any stretches anywhere sort of near to St Mark's that needed doing, I'd be happy to do them.
No, well, the Walkley ones, there isn't anywhere less than a mile from St Mark's, so it would involve you in a bit of a walk. So the best arrangement.
Well, that's all right. That's all right. I wouldn't mind that.
Okay, but I can give you something a bit closer to St Mark's. I can give you something around Whittam Road, near the Broomhill Shopping Centre.
Yeah, well, yeah, sure. That's what I was.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Now,
That's what I was
could I
thinking.
leave? Could I just drop it off at John's? John's 12 Southbourne Road.
Okay.
I can send you an email, Alan, with my address if you don't know it, just so you've got it
Okay.
precisely, and you
So-
can let me know what time you'll be wanting to come and pick them up. I'm pretty flexible on Sunday, I think.
Right. Yes, but I would guess it would probably be sometime between about 11 and 11:30.
Could you leave them in a bin, John?
I could do, yes. I can
So we
certainly
could leave John's bins are just outside his door,
Right.
and they could be left in a bin. And what I'll do is I'll leave you fairly straightforward roads to do that are probably off Whittam Road, just below Broomhill Shopping Centre.
Okay.
And how much time have you got?
Well, I can give it as much time as necessary.
Okay, well, a couple of hours at a reasonable pace, no more.
Yeah.
I'll probably give you a couple of hundred maximum, and I'll leave a map, and I'll make sure it's with John in good time for you to pick up on Sunday.
Okay, excellent. And I was also wondering, I don't know whether you think that if COVID is likely to be around for some time yet, if rather than carrying on postponing all elections indefinitely, which could be seen as undermining democracy, they should consider doing it as an all postal ballot.
Yeah, and that's the obvious thing. It's the obvious thing to do. Obviously, the count is a problem, but if you have to take time over the count, I mean, it's a problem in America because Trump would go berserk. But here, if it takes 2 or 3 days to safely count using postals, that's fine. It's the obvious.
Sure.
It's the obvious solution.
So I would guess that this year, because the lockdown only started pretty suddenly in mid-March, there probably wouldn't have been enough time to organise.
No, there wouldn't. No. But they should. I'm sure they will be thinking about that. I think there would be a problem if the Tories, for whatever reason, didn't want to hold the elections and tried to find the excuse not to hold them, because all postal is the solution.
Oh yes, certainly.
Okay, all right. So we will. John will email you with confirming the address, and there'll be a package for you on Sunday. And let's hope it's not raining.
Yes.
But thanks for offering, Alan, and we'll see you soon.
Sure. Okay.
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 All right. Bye-bye.
Okay. Good night.